The first time I realized my neighbor was going to destroy her own life, she was standing in my driveway holding a latte and smiling like she'd already won. "You've got 14 days, Mr. Bennett," she said, tapping the folded HOA notice against my chest like she was knighting me with it. After that, the wall comes down. I remember looking past her shoulder at the dark clouds building over the Carolina pines and thinking, you really have no idea what you just did. See, people thought this whole thing started because of a wall, but it didn't. It started years earlier, with water, and with a woman named Denise Holloway who couldn't stand the idea that someone in the neighborhood wasn't afraid of her. My name's Caleb Bennett. I'm 46 years old, retired civil hydraulic engineer, spent most of my life designing flood mitigation systems for counties that got hammered every hurricane season from Georgia to Louisiana. I used to joke that I understood water better than most people understood their own families. Water tells the truth, eventually. It always does. My wife Rachel says that's probably why I became such a quiet man after retirement. Because once you spend 20 years watching rivers swallow roads and storms erase million-dollar homes overnight, you stop wasting energy arguing with people. You just wait. We moved to Ashton Ridge about 3 years ago after my back injury finally forced me out of the field. Nice neighborhood on paper, tree-lined streets, clean sidewalks, big Southern-style homes with fake shutters, and those decorative gas lanterns people never actually turn on. But the lot we bought sat lower than the rest of the subdivision, and that's why we could afford it. Nobody wanted the property because every heavy storm turned the backyard into a swamp. The realtor called it seasonal pooling. I called it what it was, a drainage basin waiting to become a lawsuit. But I also knew something everybody else didn't. I knew exactly how to fix it. My son Noah helped me survey the property that first summer. Kid was 16 then, all elbows and attitude, but smart as hell. We spent weekends driving stakes into the soil, checking elevation drops, mapping runoff patterns after storms. My daughter Ellie would sit on the porch wrapped in a blanket watching us work, while using her inhaler every 20 minutes because the humidity around standing water tore her lungs apart. That's the part nobody in the HOA ever cared about. To them, the retaining wall I built was an eyesore. To me, it was the difference between my little girl sleeping through the night or waking up choking for air. Denise Holloway didn't care about any of that. Denise cared about control. You know the type: divorced, wealthy, bored, walking around the neighborhood like she was the mayor of a tiny kingdom nobody asked for. She ran the Ashton Ridge Homeowners Association for almost 8 years and treated those HOA bylaws like they were scripture carved into stone tablets. She fined people over mailbox colors, grass height, basketball hoops, Christmas lights left up too long. One family down the street moved out because she kept citing them over a wheelchair ramp for their disabled father. That's the kind of woman she was. The first time she came onto my property, she didn't even introduce herself. She just stood there staring at the retaining wall while Noah and I were mixing concrete. "That color isn't approved," she said. "Not hello. Not welcome to the neighborhood. Just that." I wiped sweat off my face and looked over at her. "Afternoon to you too." She ignored it. HOA guidelines specify sandstone beige for all visible structures. I glanced at the section she was pointing at. One little corner we'd painted dark brown because Noah grabbed the wrong bucket from Lowe's. Truth is, I left it there on purpose. Rachel figured that out later and asked me if I'd done it intentionally. I told her, some people need bait before they walk into the trap. Denise filed the violation notice 3 days later. $500. Most people would have repainted the wall and moved on, but Denise didn't want compliance. She wanted surrender. And once she realized I wasn't intimidated by her, things got personal real fast. She started posting pictures of my property in the community Facebook group, calling the wall a visual blight. At HOA meetings, she'd make little comments about certain residents thinking they're above neighborhood standards. Folks would look down into their laps while she talked because nobody wanted to become her next target. But here's what nobody knew. While Denise was obsessing over paint colors and property values, I'd already discovered something buried underneath the edge of her yard. Something that explained exactly why her basement had stayed dry for all those years while every other house downhill flooded during storms. And once I understood what she'd been hiding underground, I realized this was never going to end with a fine. It was going to end with somebody losing everything. I found the pipes by accident, and honestly, if Denise hadn't pushed so hard to tear down my wall, I probably never would have gone looking. About a week after the HOA voted to force demolition, I was outside checking moisture levels near the north side of the property when my steel probe suddenly hit something hollow underground. At first I figured it was old irrigation line, maybe leftover construction debris from when the subdivision got built 15 years ago. But then I heard it. This low mechanical vibration humming through the soil like a diesel engine buried under mud. I remember kneeling there in the grass while rain clouds rolled overhead thinking, that doesn't belong here. So I started digging. Not much, just enough to expose part of the line. 8-inch industrial PVC. Commercial grade. Way too large for residential runoff. And every inch of it angled downhill toward my property, toward the basin, toward my house. I stood there staring at that pipe for a solid minute before I started laughing, because suddenly everything made sense. Denise's house sat uphill from mine, highest lot in Ashton Ridge, but she had a finished basement with imported hardwood flooring and some ridiculous custom wine cellar she bragged about at neighborhood parties. Problem was, uphill properties collect groundwater pressure like crazy during hurricane season. Whoever built that mansion years ago must have realized the entire slope underneath her foundation was saturating every time heavy rain came through, so somebody installed a private underground pump system to redirect the water downhill. Into my yard. Illegal as hell, by the way. In a federally mapped flood zone, you can't alter natural drainage patterns without permits, environmental review, engineering oversight. The fines alone can ruin you. And Denise either never knew or never cared. As long as her basement stayed dry, that was good enough for her. Here's the funny part, though. My retaining wall had accidentally become the only thing preventing her system from catastrophically backflowing under pressure. That wall wasn't just protecting my house anymore. It was protecting hers too. The second I realized that, I stopped arguing with the HOA completely. Rachel noticed it first. "You're being way too calm," she said one night while we were lying in bed listening to thunder roll outside. "That woman is trying to bulldoze months of work and you're acting like you already know how this ends." I stared up at the ceiling fan spinning in the dark and said, "Because I do." She turned toward me. "Caleb, trust me." And she did. God bless that woman, she always did. The demolition crew showed up the following Monday around 8 in the morning. Big yellow excavators, jackhammers, 3 contractors wearing neon vests like they were heading into a war zone. Denise arrived 10 minutes later in white jeans and sunglasses carrying one of those overpriced coffees with foam art on top. She walked across my lawn smiling so wide you'd think she was attending a ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Last chance to stop this peacefully," she said. I looked at her and almost felt bad for what was coming. Almost. "Actually," I said, pulling a folder from under my arm. "Before your guys start tearing into a hydraulic structure on my property, I just need one signature." She frowned. "What now?" "Liability acknowledgement. Standard procedure." That part wasn't entirely true, but it sounded official enough. Her attorney, this skinny kid fresh out of law school, stepped closer trying to read the document over her shoulder. I could literally see concern creeping across his face. "Ms. Holloway," he started saying, "maybe we should review." She snatched the paper out of his hands. "Oh, for God's sake." Then she signed it. Fast. Arrogant people always sign fast. I still remember the scratching sound of her pen moving across the page while rain started misting down around us. That signature transferred responsibility for all resulting hydrological consequences tied to the demolition. Every flood shift, every drainage disruption, every structural outcome, all hers. She handed the paper back and smiled. "There. Happy." "Very," I said. The kid lawyer looked sick. The wall came down in under 5 hours. Noah wouldn't even watch after the first hour. He just disappeared into the garage and started lifting weights like he was trying to deadlift his anger through the concrete floor. Ellie stood at the upstairs window, clutching her inhaler, while Rachel made coffee she never drank. And me? I just stood there in the rain watching months of engineering collapse into mud, while Denise practically glowed with satisfaction across the yard. At one point, she actually raised her coffee cup toward me like we were toasting at a wedding reception. "Maybe next time you'll follow community standards," she shouted over the machinery. I nodded. Maybe. What she didn't know was that by then, I'd already filed paperwork with the county engineering office, the state environmental agency, and my insurance provider. I documented everything. The HOA order, the signed liability transfer, the flood maps, the drainage surveys, every single thing. I even sent copies certified mail because I wanted timestamps on everything. See, people think revenge is loud. It usually isn't. Real revenge is paperwork. Real revenge is patience. Real revenge is giving someone every opportunity to stop digging before they bury themselves alive. About 10 days later, Denise announced she was hosting the annual Ashton Ridge summer party in her backyard. Biggest social event of the year. Caterers, live jazz band, wine tents, the whole rich suburban circus. Rachel asked me if we were seriously going after everything that happened. Absolutely, I told her. Why? She asked. I looked outside toward the dark line of storm clouds building over the horizon again. Because I want a front row seat. By then the weather reports had everybody nervous. Tropical storm Helena formed off the Atlantic earlier that week and kept strengthening faster than predicted. Category 1 became Category 2, then Category 3 in less than 36 hours. The local news stations started running non-stop coverage. All those meteorologists standing in front of giant red radar maps, trying to smile, while explaining that maybe people should prepare for severe flooding. I didn't need the Weather Channel to tell me what was coming. I could feel it in the air pressure, in the soil, in the silence before sunset. The night of Denise's party felt wrong from the second we arrived. You ever get that feeling where the world suddenly goes too quiet underneath all the noise? That's what it felt like. Everybody else was drinking wine and laughing under string lights, while this massive wall of purple-black clouds swallowed the western sky inch by inch. Denise floated through the crowd in this bright green dress, acting like queen of the neighborhood. Every conversation somehow circled back to how she protected property values by forcing me to remove the wall. At one point, she actually put a hand on my shoulder and said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "No hard feelings, Caleb. Sometimes communities need rules to survive." I looked past her toward the tree line bending in the wind. "You're right," I said quietly. "Some things don't survive without barriers." She laughed like I'd made a joke. That's the thing about people like Denise. They never hear the warning, even when you hand it to them directly. Around 9:30, my phone buzzed. Message from an old colleague at the county office. Hurricane Helena had shifted overnight. Direct landfall. Estimated arrival less than 24 hours. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked around at the glowing party lights reflecting off crystal wine glasses while thunder rolled somewhere far out in the dark. Then I looked down the hill toward the basin where floodwater always traveled. And for the first time all night, I genuinely felt sorry for everybody standing in that backyard. The hurricane hit just after 2 in the morning, and I knew the exact moment the system failed because the whole house shook like something underground had punched the earth from beneath us. Not thunder, not wind, something heavier. Rachel sat straight up in bed beside me while rain hammered the windows hard enough to sound like gravel. "What was that?" she whispered. I didn't answer right away because deep down, I already knew. I walked to the hallway window overlooking the neighborhood and saw darkness swallowing Ashton Ridge one street at a time. Power lines were snapping somewhere beyond the trees, transformers bursting blue against the sky, floodwater already racing down the roads like rivers finding old paths they remembered. And then I saw it, water pouring out from underneath Denise Holloway's house. Not around it, under it. The backflow had started. The pump system underneath her foundation had finally overloaded. Thousands and thousands of gallons reversing direction all at once because the retaining wall that once redirected pressure safely across the basin was gone. Denise had ordered its destruction herself. By dawn, the neighborhood looked like a war zone. Mud everywhere. Cars halfway underwater. Patio furniture floating through cul-de-sacs. The smell hit first when I stepped outside. Sewage, gasoline, soaked insulation. Wet earth. That rotten flood smell you never forget once you've lived through it. Noah stood beside me on the porch staring downhill at Denise's property. "Holy hell," he muttered. Her basement windows had blown outward completely. Thick brown water surged through the lower level of the house like the structure itself was bleeding from inside. The backyard where she'd hosted that elegant summer party less than 12 hours earlier was now a swamp littered with overturned tables and tangled string lights drifting in the mud. Then came the screaming. Denise stumbled out her front door soaked waist deep, mascara running down her face, yelling at emergency responders before they'd even gotten equipment off the trucks. "It was him," she screamed, pointing directly at my house. "He caused this. He sabotaged the drainage system. I remember the firefighters exchanging looks because people say insane things after disasters all the time. But Denise kept going. He tore down the barrier. He knew this would happen. And technically, she was right about one thing. I didn't know. I just wasn't the one who ordered it destroyed. County inspectors started arriving around 8 that morning after multiple homes reported structural flooding. One older inspector named Walter Green walked the property line with me while rain still drizzled through the trees. Walter had probably been doing environmental compliance work since Reagan was president. Quiet guy, sharp eyes. He looked exhausted before I even handed him the folder. "You've got documentation?" he asked. I handed him everything. HOA demolition order, signed liability waiver, flood zone maps, drainage studies, photos of the illegal discharge pipes, video recordings, insurance notices. Every single page dry inside waterproof sleeves while Denise stood 20 feet away screaming into her cell phone at some attorney who was probably regretting answering that call. Walter flipped through the paperwork slowly, then stopped at the liability agreement with Denise's signature across the bottom. He looked up at me over his glasses. "She signed this willingly?" "Right there in my driveway," I said. He stared at her house another few seconds before asking the question that changed everything. "Where are the permits for the underground pump system?" Denise heard him and froze. I mean, literally froze. The kind of stillness that only happens when someone realizes the floor underneath their life just disappeared. "What pump system?" She snapped back way too fast. Walter didn't even blink. "Ma'am, we already located 3 unauthorized commercial discharge lines beneath your retaining slope." Her attorney finally arrived about an hour later. This sweaty middle-aged guy trying desperately to gain control of a situation that had already detonated. But it was too late. Environmental teams uncovered the entire drainage setup by noon. Industrial pumps, unregistered excavation work, illegal rerouting of groundwater inside a federally regulated floodplain. Every single thing attached directly to Denise Holloway's property records. And once investigators connected the demolition order to the flooding event, that was it. Insurance denied her claim within 3 weeks. Gross negligence, unauthorized environmental modifications, assumption of liability. Those phrases started showing up everywhere. Then the lawsuits hit. For neighboring families sued the HOA. Denise got hit personally. State environmental penalties alone came close to $200,000 before remediation costs even started. Her lawyer tried arguing that she didn't understand the engineering consequences when she signed the demolition authorization, but that defense collapsed the second my video footage got introduced. There she was on camera, smiling, mocking, dismissing every warning I gave her. Turns out juries really don't like arrogant people who destroy flood barriers in hurricane zones just to win neighborhood arguments. Funny how that works. About 6 months later, Denise's house went into foreclosure. Last I heard, she moved into a condo somewhere outside Charlotte, and the HOA dissolved entirely after the lawsuits bankrupted the association. Some neighbors still think I should have warned her more aggressively, maybe forced the issue harder once I discovered the illegal system. Maybe they're right. I've thought about that a lot, actually. But here's the thing nobody understands unless they've spent years working around nature. Some people only believe consequences are real after the water reaches their own front door. A month after the foreclosure auction, Noah and I rebuilt the retaining wall. Bigger this time. Stronger. Fully permitted. Ellie sat on the porch breathing clean, dry air through lungs that finally stopped fighting her every night. And Rachel leaned against my shoulder while we watched concrete cure under the autumn sun. And every now and then, especially when storm clouds roll in over the trees, I still think about Denise standing in my driveway with that stupid coffee cup smiling like she'd already won. Truth is, she probably could have stopped the whole disaster at any moment. All she had to do was listen. But pride makes people deaf. And water doesn't care about pride. So now I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, would you have warned Denise one last time before the hurricane hit, even after everything she did? Or would you have stepped aside and let her face the consequences of her own choices? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, after all these years, I still don't know if I did the right thing.